Uh, there were several that celebrated the Christmas, and you had a lot of Christmas songs and a lot of things that talked about Christmas. This is kind of the wrap-up of it as you look in Luke chapter 2 and verse 39. And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. If you might recall, life for them was pretty interesting in what we knew from before. They may have been trying to live their life as two individuals that were hoping to be a couple, and then all of a sudden, God breaks a 400-year silence and decides to start visiting folks, and they were two that he visited. And what that led to was the story of Christmas that we have, where they were forced to go to Bethlehem at that time. Jesus was born there. The Magi come and tell Herod about what's going on. Herod gets upset, and Herod is trying to find this king that might replace him. And as a result, they move to someplace else into Egypt, and then now they have moved back to Nazareth. And here's what Matthew says it this way. And an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. He was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream. So after the dust is settled, they set up camp in Nazareth. It goes on here it says that he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that they could be, what was spoken by the prophet might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. So that's kind of the background of what we have developing here as we look at our passage, is that Jesus was born. His parents had gone through some miraculous things, visit by shepherds, visit by the Magi, the interaction in the temple, all these things, but now they're settled. And what I would call the settled of what I would call the mundane. So we need to keep focused in the mundane. As we look at this and we see that Nazareth, well, there's a place, if you remember Nathaniel in the book of John, he said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Now, Marty and I are really enjoying Colorado Springs and all the things that it provides, like thrift stores and such, that we don't have back in our small community, wherein we have to go miles to find a thrift store, okay, or a Walmart. And so I don't know what all Nazareth had, but from Nathaniel's perspective, it's like it's something that's not known for anything of value. And so this is the place that Mary and Joseph are at this particular time. Now, as I try to envision what that would be like, I kind of see things settling down a little bit. Work at the carpentry shop going on. And although it was probably very busy, but it's probably very systematic. And they had their patterns. They probably had their pattern of how work looked and how family worked and how other things in social circles worked. And it was pretty much day to day going along in that particular area. And what I would like to call that is that just kind of the mundane, the day-to-day things that take place. There's an author that I like to read. His name is Paul Tripp. And Paul Tripp says this, says change typically takes place in 10,000 little moments, not one life-altering event. The little moments of life are profoundly important precisely because they are the little moments. We live most of our existence in these mundane, everyday moments. For every substantial, life-changing moment, we experience 10,000 insignificant moments. One of the things that we have to consider is that as Mary and Joseph spend these next 10 years, from the time when Jesus was a toddler to where he's 12 years old, that they had probably a pretty systematic life. Things were going on, and one of the things that they did was that they would get together and they would go to the feast in Jerusalem. It says, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. There were 3 feasts that the adult males were required to go through, and Jesus, being 12 years old, I'm sure he just went along because he was going with his family, but the next year he would be required to go as an adult in regard to this. So this was one of the things that was a part of their mundane, although I accept the fact that of the mundane, it was probably the exciting part of the mundane, because the people would get together with family and they would all travel together in caravan, and probably a great amount of fellowship and all that took place. So it kind of was a little break from their normal day-to-day life, but yet still it was a time when they were just going through life. And as I think about the mundane, is that those are the times where we're tempted to cruise. I've worked with parents for quite a while. We've been in ministry now for 40 years, and in that time, we started out working with teens and their parents, and over the years, we've been working with them in a lot of different ways. And what we've found is that there's different times where life is crazy for a parent, usually around the toddler time and things along that, and where everything is dictated. Then there's that little period of time before the teenage year hits, where things seem to calm down a little bit in most families, okay? Where there's like, oh, they're doing their schoolwork, they're doing their things, they got their stuff going on. Now we just have to keep up with all their activities and things like that. And then there might be a little more crises in the teen years for some situations. But anyway, one of the things that's true even in church life is that we can get to a place where we have gone through things the same way on a regular basis, and it becomes really the mundane. It becomes the regular. That becomes the things that we always do. And as a church consultant, I've worked with churches for quite a few years now, and one of the things they wrestle with is how do we determine what our vision should be and what we should focus on. And one of the things that sometimes get in the way is that we get complacent and happy with what things are going. And and that's what one of the challenges would be in regard to the when we are involved with the mundane things of life, when things are going easy. Now, it's also, you notice here, is Jesus is 12 years old. The obvious thing there is that nothing has been said about Jesus, Mary, or anything else, Joseph, for 10 years at least, depending upon how old he was when that Nazareth statement is. And so he is now 12 years old. And I don't know about you, and this is not meant to be any kind of reflection on the 12-year-olds that you know or might be here today, but I can tell you that 12 years old was not my finest hour, okay? It was a time where I wasn't sure whether I was a kid or a teen or what. And you know how that is when you're sitting around and your parent is talking about your life as a child, and they can say, Scott, I remember when you were 12, and you're like all of a sudden worrying about what story is going to come about that 12-year-old years. And so here you have Jesus at age 12. I don't really know why God decided to give us this insight in regard to this by his age, other than that which takes place next. So what we have is we've got a 12-year-old and the rest of his family, and they are there worshiping in Jerusalem as was required for them to do, and now they are going to this feast. Look what it says next in verse 43. It says, and when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy, Jesus, stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. Now, bear in mind, this isn't like they were just kind of all packed in the car and they couldn't realize they missed a kid. You know, it wasn't like that. It was a situation where they are going this 4-day journey, 75 miles, working kind of as a caravan, because at that time of the feast, not only were the people going there to celebrate, that was a great opportunity for people to do some evil and to take advantage of people while they were traveling. And so what you have is a big caravan. So it's very logical that they may have thought that Jesus was with a cousin or someone else that might be there, and as maybe all the 12-year-olds ran together, I don't know. But as a result, they started bedding down after a day's journey, just about maybe a quarter of the way back home, and they're kind of going, well, hey, anybody seen Jesus? No, he's not with you? No. And so they figure out right at that particular time that they have not taken Jesus with them. Now, they're a day away. And I don't know if you've done a day's trip and figured out really how long it'll take to get back from a day's trip. But usually it's at least a day, But the idea is, so I don't know if they were doing the math in their heads or anything, but they had no way of calling back to Jerusalem and say, hey, by the way, do you happen to have a 12-year-old boy that might be just kind of hanging by himself, not knowing what to do, but no, that they didn't have that option. So they had to go all the way back to Jerusalem. And this is the part where I call the messy. That not only do we need to be focused in the mundane, when there's times when we're tempted, things are going so well, we are content in the Lord. Sometimes I could even say complacent, because things are going so easy that we don't need to depend upon God. Sometimes our prayer life becomes a little vanilla because we've seemed like we have most of our stuff answered. Then life gets messy. And you can imagine how messy it was for Mary and Joseph at this particular point. Because I don't know what would go through your mind, but as I think about what would be going through my mind if I had just left my child and I am a full day away from them, and knowing that we have just gone through some area that potentially, there could have been thieves or whatever that could have been along that area. So immediately they have to turn about and go back towards Jerusalem. I don't know what that all entailed. I don't know if they had to take a little bit of entourage with them. My guess is that they, that maybe even some others came, and just the embarrassment of that, of saying, well, hey, what are you guys doing? Well, we lost a kid, kind of a deal. So we got to go back and get him, So you got the embarrassment, you got the frustration, you got the what ifs and should haves and woulda, shoulda, couldas, all those type of things going on, just like in any messy situation that we find ourselves in. We start doubting things and working through, and we kind of have that, that home alone experience as the parents recognize that they didn't have their boy with them on that long trip. So we're going into the messy, and it says this is what it says on Luke 2:44. It says, but then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. Now, we know it took at least 3 days. So part of that is maybe they had to take a slower route back, because they kind of had to pay more attention to things, looking for some clues. They don't know whether he stayed in Jerusalem or they lost him on the way. But all this is about 3 days worth of concern. First day was no concern. You ever have those situations where you're just ignorant of the fact that you got a problem, and you're just going down the road and you don't realize it, and all of a sudden you realize you got a problem, and all you can think of is, why couldn't I not figure this out earlier? And you just regret and say, oh, this type of thing. And so that's one of the things that comes when we get into messy, is looking back and saying, why didn't I figure this out sooner? I work with a lot of people that are either going through a counseling situation or a reconciliation situation, and many times what they are tempted to do is to track the amount of time that they have been in the difficulty that they're going through. And they start tagging back to, it's been X amount of days or X amount of weeks. And sometimes in marriages, they will go, it's been so many years of this, and they will start regretting all these things. Why didn't I learn these things sooner? That type of thing. And I think that's part of what maybe Mary and Joseph might have been in with this anxiety, because they're searching, they're frantic for a solution. One of the things I thought of in regard to this, if you know the story, usually God came to Joseph while he was sleeping in a dream. And I can imagine Mary saying, hey, Joseph, why don't you just go to sleep? And maybe God will tell you where Jesus is. Now, that might sound silly, but do we not come up with some similar solutions? We're grasping at straws, trying to figure this out as we're making this day's journey back to try to fix that which we didn't even know was broken until after a day of things going on. And then the blame shifting. I thought you were watching him. No, it's not my day to watch him. It's your day to watch him. Whatever it might have been, or even the thought. God entrusted us with Jesus, God. We had one job to do, and we lost Jesus, And, it's just kind of, I don't know if you feel that way sometimes, where you feel like, man, I was entrusted by God with something, and I failed. I wasn't observant. I got distracted. I didn't have my eye on what was going on. And all those types of things can be developed in this situation. So they've gone through these 10 years of pretty much everything going pretty well. Jesus grew and they were going on. They had other children. They had all the things and doing family life, And then they go and they celebrate church just like we would do church. And they all of a sudden they're going back home. All the memories, wasn't that great? Where's Jesus? Crisis hits. Messy hits. And we find ourselves in those type of things. And we lose our focus that God wants us to see the messy as being an opportunity for him to be glorified. I tease a little bit about Joseph fall asleep and maybe an angel will come and talk to you. But, you don't see anything really in the passage where either one of them suggests anything in regard to turning to God or getting God's help in the situation. It just, as you read it, it's pretty much just seems like what we would do normally when we've got a problem. We just go fix a problem and try to figure it out. Maybe get some friends to help us out, those type of things. And forget that we really do need to lean into God when the messy takes place. We really need to know that the messy is an opportunity for us to mature and become more like Jesus Christ, and to recognize that God has a plan in that messy situation. Well, the messy moves into Luke chapter 2:46, where I call the marvelous. Because in this situation, we have the word, astonishment, amazement that takes place. Because after 3 days, they're looking around, they found him in the temple. I don't know if that's the first place they went, but I know it's the last place they look for him. So I know that. But the idea is they found him in the temple. And they saw him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. So the parents come in, and this is what they see. They see their 12-year-old son. And I don't know what they imagined. Maybe they thought he was all upset and frustrated, wondering where his parents were, wondering where all his family was, upset that he missed the train, all this kind of stuff. And rather than that, he is sitting there with full confidence, working with the religious leaders, and they were just astonished or amazed at what he was doing as a 12-year-old. Now, I don't know exactly what all took place here. It's a possibility that this could have been going on just that day. Or, since over 3 days have taken place, this could have started shortly after his parents left. And they could have been spending days of coming into the temple and listening to this young man and interacting with him, going home after some time, conspiring together to come up with some ways that maybe we can, understand this, or maybe match the wits of this young man. I don't know what all took place, but they were amazed. The word amazed there is different than what we'll see in the next verse, but that his parents have. This amazed is that concept of they were pushed off their position, like mind blown, kind of deal, where they can't fathom it. It was just amazing what this young man was doing. It would be like a prodigy that was able to come in and do something that they had studied and studied and studied, some of them for decades, to know the things. And he comes in at 12 years old, not yet old enough to even be considered, to even be there officially, and yet he is confounding them with how much he knows. And they are just amazed. Now look at the next one where I call it the shocked parents. He says, and when his parents saw him, they were astonished. Similar word in the sense of the amazed, but the word is different in that it's like shocked in a, I just got punched kind of shocked kind of experience, it was just not what they wanted to see. It wasn't what you would think. I mean, I would think, wow, you come in there, that's our boy. Look at that now. He's there. He takes after me. Joseph, he doesn't take after you for nothing. But the idea is that you would think they would come in and be excited, but they are instead shocked and astonished. And his mother betrays what's in her heart, where she says, son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. That word distress also has some meaning behind it, because it's kind of a torturous feeling. And if you've ever been in distress, you feel tortured. You feel like whether the breath is coming out of you, or your innards are just all in turmoil, or your brain is just all frazzled. It's a tormenting thing when you can't be in control of something that you ought to be in control of. When you've lost something that you need desperately, that concept of great distress. Mary is basically, rather than saying, wow, this is marvelous, this is amazing, she's still stuck a little bit in the messy, okay? She's still got messy on the brain. And so even though God is doing a great miracle before her eyes, as she sees this, she's still bringing in that messy that's going on. That is not too unlike what we do when God is trying to introduce us into the things that should cause us to have awe of him and to be able to see him bigger. We still got the other things that have gotten so big in our life that are making some conflict in us. And so what we have here is this messy that is going on. And what we'll see as we look at what Jesus' reply. And some might think that the reply of Jesus is talking back, and it's not. I think of it as him giving her a gentle reminder. And he said to them, why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? God gives us some gentle reminders sometimes to help us realize that we have gone through our messy without him. We've gone through our messy without remembering the things he's already told us, the things that he's promised us, the guidelines he's given to us, the things that he has told us would help us be able to navigate the messies. And I think this is his way of coming alongside her and gently telling her, a lot of your torment is self-inflicted. That's hard for us to accept sometimes, right? Because we like to not own that. We like to think that all the pain and suffering we have is due to somebody else's actions. And sometimes we may even assign it to God. And Mary, in her statement, she was saying, we experienced distress. We experienced all this because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Folks, we can get tempted to do that sometimes. We don't say it out loud. We don't say it to God that way, but we may act that way and think that way. God, I wouldn't be in all this distress if you hadn't done this or that. Or if you had done this or that, I wouldn't be in distress. And sometimes that's other people that we'll say. But the whole point is here that God wants us to learn that in our times of mundane, we're going to have a need to make regular habit of spending time with God and refreshing with Him so that when the messy comes, we're not caught off guard. In the messy, we need to double down on our times with God and worshiping Him and understanding Him, because we're going to be so tempted to go all sorts of other directions. And then in the marvelous, we need to reflect upon what God is really doing. One of the areas of our marvelous is our decision to trust Jesus as our personal Savior. Some of you have a great remembrance of the time when Jesus came and transformed your life, and you can remember it to great detail as what it was like before and what it was like afterwards. Some of you probably don't know that because you were so young when it took place, and yet you still marvel at the fact that Jesus saved you and Jesus provides you hope. Can I encourage all of us, regardless of what our experience might be, that we be looking for the marvelous that is going on, that our only testimony should not be that which tags back to when we got eternal life, but that we should have testimonies of what deals with our abundant life in Jesus Christ. The last bit we're going to look at is just how this all wraps up. And it says here, it says in Luke 2:40 through and 51 and 52, keep focused for the maturation. It says this about Jesus, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. She didn't understand earlier, we know from verse 50. Now she's treasuring these things in her heart. This is part of the emotional challenge that it talks about for Mary. But he went home. Very interesting. Again, my creative mind was like, wow, this guy was a prodigy in Jerusalem. This would be a great opportunity. He should just stay there. I mean, like, Samuel did that with Eli, kind of a deal, maybe, just leave Jesus there and he could really, really, really get some good training, upper level training. He went home, made himself submissive to his parents, and he started, it says this, and he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with man. His relationship with self, others, and with God all increased. The word increased there is different than what we saw in verse 40. But the word increased is the idea of a blacksmith that's taking a tool, and it starts out really rough, and he's hammering and hammering and hammering, and he's extending out that blade or whatever it might be through all the pressure that is there. It's an intentional work to see development. As we look at just kind of the summary of this, to keep focused, and as you consider this chart that is here, right here, it says keep focused. You have the maturation. The whole purpose of us is to become more like Jesus Christ. Whether you're in the mundane and life is going on good, that you ought to continue to think, how can I continue to be more like Jesus Christ? When the messy hits, how can I keep from being distracted from doing that which God wants me to do? And when we get to the marvelous, am I prepared to see what God is doing? Do I really recognize what God's doing? Or do I just see it as another part of life and I miss out on what God intends for us? 2026 is here, and you have an opportunity to stay focused. And we want to encourage you as we sing this closing song to ask the question, are you willing to let God have His way in your life?